Thank you very much, Barbara, for that lovely introduction. Yes, we do go back a long way. I think it was some seedy village somewhere in Maharashtra. But I also want to thank the organizers and Marcus and his team for giving me this opportunity to be here and to visit this lovely country with seriously nice people everywhere all the time. I can't believe it, and I know that many of you have been walking around saying exactly the same thing. We have never, ever met so many nice people at the same time, all the time. It's amazing. So thank you. So my task, the task that was set to me was to kind of set the stage for the second day of deliberations on the theme of equity. But it is the second day, and we've heard a lot around equity and social justice and gender equality yesterday. We've also heard it resonating clearly through the plenary themes. Many speakers before me kind of set the stage quite clearly. What was quite inspiring for me personally was the warm Yaraga welcomes and dinner speech that reminded us what this earth is about, cultural and spiritual flows, and first and foremost, people. This theme is part of our work in WASH, but it's also intensely personal. So I decided really to talk about it from quite a heavily personal lens and just to show you some photographs to illustrate some of the principles that I'm going to propose to you to really make a difference as we go forward in a more accelerated fashion, hopefully, in the next development paradigm. Now, let's first talk about this language. Equity is about fairness, and in WASH, about ensuring that users benefit fairly from water, sanitation, and hygiene services. We all know that. But yesterday, I was quite excited to hear very frequently the words social justice, gender equality, empowerment. I first met the Special Rapporteur in 2011, and we had a long and passionate discussion about whether the sector was ready to move from equity to equality. Katrina de Albuquerque is a passionate champion for a change in terminology, and I believe she's right. I think the time is right, and yesterday we had a couple of sessions that talked about equity in WASH, or really WASH for equity and equality, which is really, I think, where we're moving in the post-2015 development era. Now let's spend a couple of minutes on inequality and equality in general. It's part of modern humanity, but the ways in which it is maintained and exploited are not fixed in our culture or in our genes. We're biologically very diverse, so no two human beings are biologically same, and thus we're not equal in that sense. And additionally, our life cycle course and path from infancy to old age and death brings in important dimensions of inequality, along the way linked to cognition, strength, skills, physical access, and experience. But human beings at any given point in time are equal, despite some famous or infamous statements and theses to the contrary, many of them racist and sexist. Although we vary biologically as individuals, we are or can be all equally good at being human. Social inequality, however, is another story. Some members of a group have more or less power than others and exert this power to capture and deny resources, sometimes unwittingly or unknowingly. Dominance is basically a means and a mechanism of getting priority access to limited resources. However, dominance is not something that we're born with or is part of our biological makeup. It is determined by individual behavior, social, geographical experience, context, and connections. But it's omnipresent in our world today and manifests itself in various ways, such as discrimination, capture, and exclusion, and we need to be proactive to correct it. This brings me to our world of WASH, water, sanitation, and hygiene. 2.5 billion people continue to live without basic sanitation. They wake up every morning and figure out how to take care of this most basic of human needs because they don't have a private and safe means to do so. Yes, the glass is half full, but the hundreds of millions of people who continue to struggle for a glass of clean drinking water, do so whilst also struggling to have adequate food, employment, housing, education, and healthcare. These are not mere numbers. They're about people like you and me, and they could just have easily been you and me. So how can we do business differently to tackle this complex reality with an equity lens in order to make right this wrong? I'm going to propose to you 7 operating principles. No magic number, just trying to be succinct and summarize. A lot of what we know, not necessarily new in themselves, but with pointers for where we can and should better invest our resources and our energy going forward. Operating principle number 1. Sanjay, in the debate yesterday, actually set this out quite easily. So those who haven't already signed up had time to sleep over it, and I hope you're all with us today. Wash is more than a service. It's a human right, and it's our collective and individual duty and obligation. I'm quoting Katerina here, but it's also what our countries have signed up to and what we all know. Whether a person is able to stay clean and smell good and is able to relieve her or himself every day in clean-smelling, private and safe surroundings, and does not have to suffer from thirst or risk drinking dirty water, is about being human, not just about services. It's fiercely political, emotional, and therefore also transformational. Yes, it's a human right, but it continues to be tragically violated every day, and therefore is our shared failure. Every human being has a right to live a full and productive life with dignity, no matter what they look like, where they come from, or what their gender and sexual identity. Lack of access to basic sanitation, safe water, and hygiene is a denial of these rights. It's our collective human responsibility to mediate and moderate this inequality. But more importantly, not doing so actively is tantamount to discrimination. Each and every one of us would be guilty of indulging and participating in discrimination if we are not proactive about this. This brings me to operating principle number 2. I love the theme of the conference, but then I started kind of thinking about the words and dissecting them a bit. And I'd like to propose that to get to everyone, we start with 1. Everyone means everybody, and we use it whenever we want to refer to the collective people in a group. For example, everyone in my family loves to travel, etc. But if I want to talk about individual preferences, I must disaggregate to the 1 in everyone. The 2.5 billion people without sanitation, and the millions more without hygiene, and the 700 million plus without safe water are big numbers. But who are they? Where are they? They include infants and their caregivers, children, young girls and boys, transgender or the third sex, pregnant women, sick people, disabled men, women and children, mothers, fathers, and grandparents. Each one has specific needs depending on age, gender identity, physical strength, health, and ability. They also include, and we've heard a lot about that in the case studies and presentations yesterday, ethnic minorities, nomadic populations, homeless people, and people systematically stigmatized or simply invisible due to occupation, location, conflict, climate change, natural disasters. So, our well-intended approaches that use common denominator principles to reach everyone will inevitably miss those who fail to fall into these neat boxes. Whatever we decide to call the approach, pro-poor, inclusive, child and woman-friendly, let's agree that we are actually party to discrimination and guilty of it if we ignore the 1 in everyone. What would happen if we just change the way we do business and start every time with the old man and woman who need a support to pull themselves up after squatting. Simple things, don't cost much at all. Or plan differential water availability and adequacy for chronically ill people. It's just a different set of basic human questions to ask at the very outset and then systematically along the way. Operating principle number 3. Situate, you heard a lot about that from Rhonda just now. Contextualize, localize, start local to go global. I'm just going to flash a couple of photographs from my travels over the last 3 months. Everywhere is unique, particular, specific, and different. You know this, we all know this. It's come through very clearly. But it is an important principle in the set of principles. That's getting to Kédougou on the eastern Malian border of Senegal with a ferry, as you can see, very, very old mechanical ferry system. You can get across the river, but then after that, it's downhill, mountainous, rocky. You have to walk a couple of hours to the nearest habitation. Only about 10 households, so often left out. It's not giving you the big numbers, but valuable human lives and amazingly achievable results that do have a spread effect and do contribute to scale. Cambodia. We've also seen some really tough conditions from this region. I don't know it very well, and I've been fortunate to be able to learn a lot from the conditions here. But really, this is women-driven development in really hard-to-reach locations. And that's something that really struck me starting the year this year. Brick kiln workers, most of them underage, as you can see, just 1 hour outside Bombay, a city of 22 million, a megapolis in bustling, developing India. So just to summarize this principle, each place is unique. And CLTS, or total sanitation approaches, water facilities, hand-washing practices, or the challenges that menstruating women face in complex gendered societies do have to be localized in context in terms of defining, addressing, and measuring. Every case study I heard yesterday was about respect for local values and appealing to those local yet universal values to examine and correct local injustice. And a last note on this is language. Yes, English may be the lingua franca, really, of our world, but in my own work, I cannot emphasize how important it's been really to try and reach out through local languages for transformation. It can really accelerate and move things faster, whether it's policy or practice. Language is key for correct idiom and metaphor. Operating principle number 4. Salute the feminine and give it voice, space, and power in the world of WASH. You would be disappointed, I'm sure, if I didn't talk about menstruation and all the WASH-related challenges linked to it. Investing in, you've heard it before, investing in girls and women is the best investment, and it's no different for WASH. And it is the entire entry point to the entire family, community, and any scale we may want to achieve in influencing human behavior for development outcomes. It's not an accident that the Australian government has identified gender equality as a critical cross-cutting theme of its aid program, or that the UK is pushing for a dedicated post-2015 goal on empowering women and girls to achieve gender equality. Conventional WASH wisdom, as we know, puts the rate of return on sanitation investments at an average of $9 for every dollar invested. I can only begin to imagine how much higher systematically engendered calculation might yield. We know of the toll that poor WASH takes on girls' schooling, skills, age of marriage, and first conception, or the health and well-being risks that mothers and infants are exposed to. But my plea today is one of social justice. How do we reverse injustice that is as old as the earth itself? So that brings me to menstruation as one example. Menstruation and the stigma, shame, and silence that surround it. give the wash world a perfect entry point to correct this injustice through simple, meaningful hygiene, water, and sanitation facilities that provide the space for girls and women to express themselves with dignity and pride. Menstrual hygiene management. It's one important intervention, but it does offer a perfect meta-indicator for multiple benefits generated by engendered wash services. MHM is breaking down sector walls as we know them because the female menstrual cycle operates at home, school, medical clinics, marketplaces, transport hubs, prisons. Women don't stop menstruating just because they're not at home. Helping us to listen and work in partnership outside WASH and to respond in a way that makes sense for women and girls. In our own work at the Council, we've decided that we just don't know enough in our WASH sector, that we need to learn much more to do this more meaningfully. And we've just launched with a real mutual learning objective towards a shared goal of gender equality, a partnership with UN Women in West Africa, a regional partnership, with three objectives really on policy, practice, and research gaps. But the larger objective is to work together meaningfully toward gender equality with the entry point of WASH, working much more on wider issues with hygiene, sanitation, and water links that include postpartum bleeding, female genital mutilation, fistula, incontinence, etc. That brings me to operating principle number 5. Put the sanitation and hygiene up there proudly with water and make sanitation the issue around which politicians fight elections. Now, I know I'm talking to many converted in here, but I did listen to the comment yesterday about water not being prioritized enough with interest, and I thought, well, that's a victory of sorts. We seem to have come full circle. But have we? I'm not so sure. Whilst all these entitlements around health, education, water, schooling are important, sanitation poverty is particularly inequitable because it's often coupled with indignity, expulsion, punishment, and shame. The sanitation poor are doubly discriminated against. Denied basic services, they're then shunned for the appalling conditions they live and work in. Sanitation workers are socially stigmatized in many parts of the world for being born into or choosing a trade that seeks to manage human waste. Surely this can't be right. We know that sanitation is severely off track and also that the H is still often silent. But because we're in the midst of a state of emergency, particularly in some countries, including my own, India, we really need to look at it squarely and center stage. How can we continue to ignore the fact that 50% of malnutrition is associated with repeated diarrhea or intestinal worm infections as a result of unsafe water, inadequate sanitation, or insufficient hygiene? Changing the way in which whole generations are born, grow, and live. This is a state of emergency and a massive equity issue, which we will need to change. And this brings me to my last operating principle, number 6. Let's link the process of building the evidence to action and change. Yes, we need evidence, no doubt. All evidence is important, anecdotal or otherwise, as we heard yesterday. But in my own experience, I actually felt that the WASH story is pretty compelling on its own. And my experience has been that you can take a sort of unsexy, a silent, something that nobody wants to talk about, bring it center stage through the voices of people who want to talk about it for policy change and a change in practice. When Barbara asked us to stand up by geographical and professional tags yesterday, I noticed that there were very few South Asians in the room. So I did decide that it was important to tell you about something that we found very exciting, that I hope is exciting for the whole sector, which is that through a process of networked advocacy, mass communications, and listening to the voices of women and girls across 5 northern states, 18,000 women and girls, and across 2 years talking to bureaucrats and policymakers. You see secretaries and ministers in there. On December 10th, 2013, just a few months ago, on Human Rights Day, the Government of India changed the national sanitation policy, the Nirmal Bharat Abhiyan, to clearly articulate menstrual hygiene management with hand washing, with linked budgets on IEC training and disposal. It is possible. We can do it. The challenge is now to support the government to really take this to everyone, everywhere. And to conclude, I'm going to cheat. It's principle number 7. A lot of people talked about social norms and behavior change. The bleak view of WASH, we heard that as well yesterday in the debate, is that if we continue to do business as usual, we'll barely keep pace. This is a complex world. We need to adapt to be more efficient and to use technology better. Will we solve the sanitation crisis by building one toilet at a time? I'm not sure, or by moving communities to ODF, monitoring them so that they don't slip back, while also trying to manage human waste in the environment. I don't know, but I do know that I'm of the generation that's schooled without the internet and without computers, turned in handwritten assignments at university with a lot of whiteout when I typed up my master's dissertation. My parents never talked to me about condoms or the pill, and there was no Google to ask. But I've seen some incredible large-scale transformations that swept my world and touched me as I grew up with huge equity impacts. The condom went from being a bad word to being acceptable and widely accessible for everyone everywhere. The humble grey latex Nirod is now available in every imaginable color, and pink is the most popular color. HIV was talked about with fear 20 years ago, but squarely addressed one day through strategic media campaigns, and now infections in India have dropped by 50% in the last 10 years. Polio was a part of Indian reality growing up, but then in the mid-90s, the government decided to do something about it. Polio drops became de rigueur for every child everywhere. The last reported case was in 2011, and if no case is reported this year, WHO will remove India from the list of polio endemic countries. These were all large, systematic interventions conceived at scale to tackle behaviors while putting people at the center. They all had huge equity impacts. In conclusion, Amartya Sen's latest book, An Uncertain Glory, makes an impassioned plea for the basics of human decency and life in thinking about progress and development. The dignity of having a safe toilet and water for drinking and hygiene figure prominently as markers of progress. So we will need to define success carefully, how we measure it. 80% is not good enough because it's the same 20% that is always left behind. This calls for a new way of measuring by putting the last mile first. In a post-MDG development paradigm that seeks to reduce inequalities while delivering good services, we will need to be more impatient and innovative to reach the systematically unreached and unserved. This House must and does believe that we can and will reach everyone, everywhere, all the time. Thank you.